Hi, everyone. My name is Han, and today I'll talk about challenges in merchandising, recommendation search for local delivery commerce, and welcome. And so I've been at DoorDash for the last 1.5 years, and prior to that, I was at Airbnb for 5 years. And over the last 6.5 years, I've learned a lot about online marketplaces, um, especially in the area of recommendation search and merchandising. And and so reflecting back on the last 1.5 years, and I've been really surprised about how some of the seemingly minor differences between the online marketplaces between Airbnb and DoorDash can make a very big difference on the marketplace itself and the choices on the algorithm and the user interfaces that we deploy for these applications. Um, so today I'll share some of these insights with you. Um, and so anecdotally, maybe I'll share this anecdote to start with, which is while I was at Airbnb and we tried very hard to try to measure user retention. And so we would run various experiments and really try to measure and construct different metrics, whether we like various things we try on the user interface and the algorithm side, whether it moves user retention. And we had very little success there at Airbnb. And the reason is basically the conversion cycle is quite long, and when you have short-term experimentation, unless you do long-term holdout, it really just doesn't show up. And long-term holdout is most of the time not frequent enough when you run these experiments. And so, because of that learning at Airbnb, when I joined DoorDash, I really wasn't paying a whole lot of attention about measuring user retention because I kind of learned from the previous experience where that's likely to be not as possible. And but surprisingly, at DoorDash, because the user order frequency is so high for the average user, even when we run short-term experimentation on the scale of a week or two, these things can actually be measured very reasonably. And because of that, there are actually things we can do that's very different when we optimize for our algorithms. This is a really big change in our experimentation and how we implement our systems. So yeah, so for the rest of the talk, I'll first give you a little more background about DoorDash and how the marketplace is set up. And then I'll talk about the challenges in merchandising recommendation search, first in the restaurant delivery area. Then I'll talk about the local delivery commerce that DoorDash is expanding to, and then I'll summarize. And first, let's talk about DoorDash. So DoorDash, like many other online marketplaces, there are more than one market participants in the marketplace. And for DoorDash's case, there's actually three parties that's involved in this marketplace. And the merchant, the consumer, and delivery people we call dashers. And they have different motivations for these parties. And in order to run this online marketplace well, we really need to think about their interest and how to balance the interest of all these parties. And in order to grow the marketplace well in a balanced way, we really have to grow all three sides of the business together in sync. And like other online marketplace businesses, especially the fast-growing ones, we always have to think about the needs of the new user and the needs of existing customer. And for the new customers, the app needs to be designed more about showing the user how the marketplace works and the various product and services that the marketplace is offering. And for existing consumers, they tend to have more repeated purchase behaviors, and but then also we have to think about how to introduce existing customers to new use cases. And another thing is, in our busy world today, all the users have a very short attention span. So the sessions that when they come to these marketplaces tend to be really short. And so this poses a really important challenge to the recommendation and merchandising systems about how to bring the most relevant products to the consumers as fast as possible. And and there are some additional challenges for DoorDash. Here, we have a very large catalog where we have, hundreds of thousands of merchants, hundreds of millions of product, and this is growing very rapidly. So how do we bring these products and merchants to the relevant users is a very, very important problem that we have to solve. And another thing is that the marketplace is very real time. The consumer demand is very transient and time sensitive. So if a consumer wants to order lunch, they basically want it in the next 15 minutes or 30 minutes. And if we cannot show them relevant content, and they would basically seek other alternatives. And for merchant, they can only fulfill so many orders in a given time window, and then for Dashers, the delivery capacity is often limited. So here we need to design our systems such that the scoring needs to be real time, the matching of consumers and merchant need to be real time, the matching of delivery people and the orders need to be real time, and we have to build forecasting systems to forecast consumer demand and forecast the amount of supply and the merchant and Dashers can provide. And so it's very important when we think about the recommendation systems and search systems to take these real-time constraints into mind, where we have to have real-time features to steer the consumer demand or meet the supply constraints. And also it's important to note that here the marketplace is very hyper local. So when a consumer is ordering restaurant food or in this local commerce where the delivery is very fast and they want it as soon as possible, they typically want something like in 15 minutes or 30 minutes. And sometimes for selection reasons, they may go farther, like an hour away. But it tends to be really limited to a local region. And so here the density is really important. So we need to have enough merchants and we need to have enough Dashers to build up a sustainable online marketplace in this hyper local way. And so in terms of backend systems, like for both relevance and search and the index, it needs to be very geographically aware. And one thing that's very interesting is that this is actually a good in terms of the catalog, where the catalog across the wider area can be quite large. In this hyper local way, the catalog is actually much smaller, but then it also introduces other problems as well. We'll talk about a little bit further. And another thing that's driving DoorDash's business today is that we're moving from the food delivery area to other local delivery commerces. So we started out in the food area, and we're expanding to conveniences and groceries, and we're also expanding to other areas like pharmacy and flower shops and gifting. And so as our business is getting more complicated, um, the the catalog is getting even bigger, and the challenges for merchandising and search is larger. And I'll talk about that in the future sections. Okay, so let's talk about the next thing. So now that we know DoorDash a little bit better, so let's talk about the challenges that DoorDash faces in the merchandising recommendation and search area for restaurant delivery. And remember, we talked about that the DoorDash has a three-sided marketplace, and these three parties have different motivations. For merchants, they care about their revenue and profit and how to reach new customers. For consumers, they really care about selection, the product selection and restaurant selection, delivery time, quality, and pricing. And for Dashers, they very much care about their earnings. And so in this setting, right, when we interact with the consumer, showing them the various products and services, so how do we do it in a way that's mutually beneficial for all the parties involved, the merchants, Dashers, and consumers? What is going on? Can you guys hear me? Okay, I'll just keep going. Oh, sorry about that. I got logged out for a second. Okay, hopefully this is working. Wait. Okay. So now that we understand these three-sided marketplace and what are the important dimensions for all the three parties. So when we design our merchandising recommendation and search systems, so what would be the appropriate optimization objective? So, in the short term, should we do per session conversion or per session profit? And in longer term, we can think about the LTV for the consumer, merchant, and Dasher. And unfortunately, for the LTV for all three parties, they're pretty hard to predict and measure in the short term. So how do we do it in a way that's optimizable for our systems? So we basically do a combination of short-term metrics that correlates with these LTVs, and we try to optimize those directly. And so when a consumer comes to the site, right, and so they actually have very different intents. Sometimes they know what they want, and so they do that by performing search, and when they perform search, we can discover what their intent is. And sometimes they don't really have a specific thing in mind, and then the systems around merchandising and recommendation becomes very important. And interestingly, that sometimes as the consumer is progressing along their user journey on our application, their intent can actually switch. It could go from more of a merchandising intent, then go into search, and vice versa. And so it's very important to meet where the consumer is and build the system to be flexible, where users can access merchandising or search actions very quickly throughout the application. And on the merchandising and recommendation side, so we have to think about how to enable merchandisers to use their knowledge of the marketplace to market various products to the consumer, and how do we programmatically find the best content for the user, and how do we work together with the merchandisers to use their knowledge about the marketplace, and how do we programmatically find insights sometimes in these very hyper local markets to bring the appropriate content to the user. And here, in terms of merchandising and recommendation, that's happening throughout the application. So on the home page or on the restaurant pages, and in terms of recommendation, that's also happening along when the user is progressing in their journey. And we at that time we know what product they have to look at or they have added to the cart, and their past history about their purchases. We can integrate all these information to figure out what's their typical user preference and what is their current session intent and preference. And so we can use that information and update that assessment to meet the user where they are throughout the application. In terms of search, it's very important to understand the user's intent, right? And the intent can be also varied. So users can do restaurant name searches or restaurant property searches, or they can search dishes by their name, or food by cuisine type or dietary preferences. And so the intent understanding first can be in a pretty complicated space, and we model that with the taxonomy. And so we need to do pretty sophisticated query understanding to understand the user intent, and we take that information to find the relevant content, and then we rank the relevant content according to what we know about the user and according to the objective functions of our system. And one thing that's also important to note is that because we have a hyper-local marketplace, sometimes the selection and supply can be pretty limited. So where sometimes the user can be searching for, their intent can be quite narrow, and so if we just stick with the very narrow definition of the intent of the user, sometimes null search result can happen. So in those cases, it's very important to gracefully back off to more broader intent that's related to the intent that user have expressed. So, we talked about the restaurant domain, and let's talk about the local delivery commerce next. And so DoorDash is going from the restaurant domain to other new verticals like convenience and grocery, and the marketplace is getting more complicated. So along with merchants and items, now we have these new verticals the users can be interacting with, and the catalog is becoming much bigger. And in a typical grocery store, there could be 30 or 40,000 items, and so the catalog is getting a lot bigger, and when the user is coming to our site, they may not even realize we have these new verticals. And so how do we promote the verticals to the user who are interested in trying out new verticals, and how do we learn the user preferences in a cross vertical way? For example, their food preferences on the restaurant domain, how does that translate to their preferences on the grocery and convenience side? And so it's also important, throughout the journey, that user may be interacting with a merchant in one vertical. We could also recommend other products across vertical, and so often, so we have this product now that where a user would order a restaurant delivery, then at the end of it we provide a free delivery for a convenience option for them. So how do we knowing what they have purchased in their restaurant domain for this particular session, can we figure out what other verticals they may be interested in, and what other products in the other verticals they may be interested in, and bring that to the user's attention as appropriately. And here again, we can take users' past history about what the products they have purchased before or reviewed or commented on, clicked on to influence how we merchandising the products to the consumer. And so also in terms of search, the intent space is a lot bigger now, and so so we need to expand the taxonomy to understand the search intent in this new space. And so the query understanding problem gets a bit harder. And also, sometimes these intent can be across multiple verticals. For example, when a user is searching for ramen, that could be a restaurant search, or it could be a grocery search, or it could be a convenience search as well. And so how do we show the search result in a way that diversifies across the vertical, but also properly prioritize the right vertical to the user? And then now there are also additional search contexts where we have a page for a new vertical. So when the user go to these new verticals, they can search within the vertical, or when they go to a particular merchant, they can search within these merchants. So it's very important to build up our catalog to support all these verticals. The product space is getting bigger, and also the real time and the hyperlocal context may change for these new verticals. For example, on the grocery side, there is actually additional problems where the shopping time, so the consumer is interacting with the system and making purchases, but when the shopper or the delivery people go to the store to shop for their product, the inventory could be very different between the time they made the purchase, between the consumer made the purchase, and when the shopper is shopping for the consumer. So it's very important there to have real-time inventory management system, such that we know what the inventory is like in a real-time basis. And also we need to have forecast about how the inventory may change at the time when the shopper is going to the store. And so how do we take that information into account when we do the recommendation and when we do the search is also very, very important. So I want to just wrap up by saying, the DoorDash online marketplace have these properties such as very large catalog, real-time online marketplace, and hyperlocal commerce. And we're expanding into from the restaurant space to other local commerce areas, and the problem is getting more and more challenging to fulfill the need of the customers and the merchant and delivery. And here, algorithms for intent understanding, personalization, and ranking algorithms are really important to solve many of these recommendation and search problems. And we're growing a lot, and we're always hiring. So please go to our career site and to look at the open roles that we have. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions.
Looks like we don't have any questions in the Event X chat at this moment, but if there are any that come up, please feel free to post them there. Oh, there comes one comes in.
Okay. Hi. Somehow this site is not working for me. So if you could read the questions,
yes, of course.
I can.
We have a question from Lauren Downey. Can you share any tips for how to approach the problem of expanding to other verticals commerce spaces from the marketplace that you built your platform for? I assume it's trickier than if you had tackled these verticals at once in the beginning versus adding new verticals to the existing model.
Yeah. So we are, kind of in the middle of this transition. So we're also learning here. So we are. So yeah, I guess we are not living in a world where we started all these verticals at the same time. So we have a very strong vertical that we have that's for the restaurant delivery business, and so from that business, we have built a very strong network around our logistics platform, our matching platform, and so we also have a pretty strong platform for search and recommendation within the restaurant business. And so our key problem here is really about how do we take advantage of what we know to spread to these new verticals. And but we're learning quite a bit, the catalog is very different. For example, on the restaurant side, there is only typically about 200 items or less for a particular merchant. But on the grocery side, it's quite large. And but the way we understand our product and how we build metadata associated with the product, and that's all reusable. And but the key here is really about how do we kind of take our learnings in that one vertical and apply to the other verticals. And so we do have some new problems we have to solve, where is kind of learning the user preferences across these verticals. So one very nice thing that we have is that we already have a very large user base from our restaurant side, and many of these customers are interested in the new verticals we're introducing. So it's very important to figure out, what are these, which of our current customers may be interested in these new verticals, and how do we introduce them to these new vertical use cases. So yeah, thank you for your question.
It looks like we have a question in the GoToWebinar question section as well.
Yeah. Do you mind reading it?
Sure.
Okay, here.
Is restaurant delivery currently available nationwide? And are the other verticals available nationwide?
Okay, yeah, so the restaurant delivery is nationwide. So there are certain areas we don't cover. So like, it certainly there is some dependencies on density. So, but we basically cover all the regions in the United States, and we are also in Canada and Australia. And then for the new verticals, we are kind of both expanding in terms of the variety of the verticals and also the geographic coverage of the verticals. So we're doing this in both dimensions at the same time.
Okay, we have another question. Can you elaborate on how you measure if a recommendation algorithm is successful? Based on increased profit for DoorDash, increased profit for merchants, increased profit for Dashers, or something in between?
Yeah, so I guess the short answer is something in between. So like so this is a very tough space where it's not, at the end of the day, what we're really paying attention to is the health of the marketplace. So in order for the marketplace to be healthy, that we really need to take care of all the three-sided market. So here is the merchant, the consumer, and the delivery people. And so I can shed some light here a little bit more where, for example, on the consumer side, right, like they really care about the selection. So in terms of selection, in a way, they want as many restaurants to be available to them as possible. So what does that mean? That means that, we should try to encourage as many merchants to be on our platform as possible. But at the same time, quality is very important to the user. So, one is we want to bring quality merchants to our platform. And then also we want to help merchants to figure out, hey, in what areas they can improve. So we actually work with the merchant to improve their quality as we learn them from our user and data. And so in terms of the recommendation algorithm, right, like, so we have to kind of balance all the three parties. And so when we have new algorithms, we have offline metrics that we're measuring, then we deploy them online, and then there's kind of a slew of metrics that we track when we run these experiments, and then we make a judgment call about how whether the improvement that we're seeing in the recommendation algorithm is worthy to be deployed in a production way.